3-1 now. 3-0. A single by Bunbury. A walk. Then you had the ground out. Then you had another walk. You had the error on Garner. Now you've got a wild pitch. You've got 3 runs in. And there's a high drive hit to left field. Going way back.
It's gone. Forget it. That, ladies and gentlemen, is Doug DeCinces with that no longer so occasional home run power. And the Birds are off to a big start. As a sign says here in the ballpark, the bird will fly.
Doug DeCinces, he can hit him as far as anybody, and of course he's ahead on the count. And you talk about these things, he's looking fastball all the way up over the plate, and believe me, I can tell you from past experience, there's nothing that goes further than a high sinker.
I'm JB. This is the Back It Up Binge podcast. I'm talking with former major leaguer Doug DeCinces. Doug, welcome to the Binge.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Appreciate you joining. As we were talking before we got on, big Orioles fan. I was going to introduce you as former Oriole, but then I didn't want to discount a very successful second half of your career with the Angels. But very excited to have you on. First question right out of the gate, when I was looking over your bio, it said that you were part of the California Air National Guard. How did you get involved with that? And did that, I would think that would have interfered with your baseball schedule and activities, did it?
Well, it actually helped my baseball activities.
Really?
This is an interesting story. Back when I signed, there was full-blown Vietnam War was going on, and I was in the very first draft lottery. It was coming out of junior college, and my draft number in the lottery was 61. And so that's not a good sign, but if you were and I was, so I signed and I went off to Bluefield, to play my first year, and then at the end of the Bluefield season, I got called up to AA, which was in Dallas, Fort Worth, Texas, and I played the last 2 weeks with them. And I drove home with a teammate and we drove 22 straight hours home from Dallas after the season, and in a VW bug stuffed with everything. Okay. The teammate was Leon Brown, and when he dropped me off at my house in the San Fernando Valley, and then he took off to drive the next 6 hours by himself up to Sacramento, where my mom and dad said, "We need to speak with you. There's kind of an urgent matter." And so we sat down, and my dad came over and he goes, "This came in the mail today." And it was the brown envelope that said United States Army Draft.
Oh.
So I had been home a total of 15 minutes after 22 hours straight. I hadn't even seen my fiance yet. And so my parents' best friend, my mom's best friend's husband, was the lieutenant colonel at the Van Nuys Air National Guard base. And they said, we took the liberty to call him, and, it's your call. Do you want to go and see if you can get into the Air National Guard, or do you open this envelope? Once you open this envelope, you're not going to be able to get in the Air National Guard or anything else. I said, no, we're going to the Air National Guard.
Right.
Because that was a one-way ticket to the jungle of Vietnam back then.
Right.
And so I was over there at 3:30, got home 3:30 I was there. 4:30 I said I do. 8:30 that night I was on a puddle jumper that went Phoenix, El Paso, Midland, San Antonio. Got me back there at 5 a.m. in the morning. That same route. and I was a member of the Air National Guard. And instead of going to Vietnam as a Army guy, I ended up becoming a med tech, and which was the only spot open. The reason why it was the only spot open is because that was the first position that was getting called to go to Vietnam. But I wasn't qualified yet, so I couldn't be called. But as soon as I got qualified, then I started looking for another position, because the Orioles were happy that I got in this position. And basically, they flew me home once a month during the baseball season. And then during the off season, I did my active duty. And that was we did that all the way through till I was in AAA. And I did last year in AAA, 74, when Vietnam was over and they were cutting everything back. And I got my honorable discharge and for service, but I became a med tech admin, because jumping out of a plane or jumping out of it, I was really trained to jump out of a helicopter and go help the guys that were shot or injured and carry them back to the helicopter and get out. Well, I found out the life expectancy for that wasn't real high. And so I said, hey, you need to get into something else. So there was an admin position that jumped in. And believe it or not, in my squad was Mike Garrett, the Heisman Trophy winner.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. Rick Dempsey was there.
Wow.
Rick Dempsey was a security police there. And another guy named Kenny Medlock, who was in my medical group. And Kenny was in AAA at that time. And he's the guy, he went on to be in movies. He was doing the acting. He was an umpire all the time in baseball things. He also was in Moneyball as the GM that got fired. Remember the one that was pretty vocal? So all of those guys went on to go and do something. And fortunately, it was because of being able to get into the Air National Guard. So that's a long story, but
no, that's a great story, and I appreciate you sharing that. Thank you for your service. Did you jump? I mean, you got trained, so you were jumping out of helicopters, right?
Yeah, I jumped, and then when I came to jump out of a big C-130, my major, who was ahead of us, and he goes, "You're a professional athlete, right?" And he goes, "How about you skip this and we're going to get you into the different position," because guys would jump out, you go through training, but you're running and jumping out of the back of a C-130. A lot of guys hit the ground not too good and break legs and do those kind of things. And he says, we got, Mike Garrett wasn't doing it, and neither was I.
I have a cousin who's a retired colonel in the Green Berets, and he does a lot of, he's in the 82nd Airborne, and he did a lot of jumps, and he told me some wild stories of some of his jumps where shoots. He told us this one story where his parachute, it was a lower level jump, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
And his chute didn't fully open. So he had maybe half the chute, fell through some trees, got injured. But I'm sitting there like, weren't you panicking? He goes, no, we just, pull this over, get this, and the training that you guys did. But thanks for your service. It's a great story. Thanks for.
Yeah. It was a little hairy doing it, That's okay. I don't want to do it again.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So in 19, I believe it's 69, you got drafted by the Padres and 70 by the Orioles. How did you wind up on the Orioles when you were first drafted by the Padres?
Well, I was a 5th round pick by the Padres, and that was before they had any real money. And I had scholarships to go to, SC, UCLA, went and saw Bobby Winkles at Arizona State, and I had UCSB, Pepperdine, a bunch of schools here. And I was thinking, well, I'd like to sign, but I know that if I don't make it, I've got these guaranteed education. And so I said, I have to have that package that Major League Baseball gives out, that if for some reason you got to go back to school, here's the money set aside for it. Well, the Padres weren't offering that. And I was and they were really not offering a lot. And I was kind of like, okay, this is my childhood dream. And my parents, again, God bless them, they left it up to me. I said, look at this, is your call, you know. And I had to tell the Padres no. And I went back to JC for the second year, and then the Orioles picked me up, and I was a third pick for them in the special phase. And all the top threes, first Jim Fuller, Mike Rhinebeck, and myself, all of us got to the big leagues. So,
Okay. So you're drafted by the Orioles. You go through their farm system. Who was some of the biggest influences for you to get you developed into the majors? Who had a big impact on you?
my baseball dad, Cal Ripken Sr.
Oh, okay.
He, you know, there's still Cal Jr. and Billy. They learned everything that I learned from their dad. And, you know, I know it takes physical ability, but it's the dedication, it's the way you go about it. If you're going to be an infielder, how you analyze everything. And Cal really, really made a big difference for me. So if I look back on one person, it was always Cal. Joe Altobelli, I played 2 years, you know, I thought he helped me better in the mental part of hitting and a few things like that. But the overall game approach and how you go about things is Cal Ripken Sr.
He had a great saying that I once heard. It's practice doesn't make perfect. Perfect practice makes perfect. I always thought that was a great saying by him.
Yes. Yeah. And, you know, that was drilled in pretty good.
Yeah, I'm sure it was. Yeah. Well, it worked. And you were a good student and he was a good teacher. So you wind up getting to the majors, but then you're tagged with this label of the guy that's replacing a legend in Brooks Robinson. How much pressure did you feel off of that? And how was Brooks during that process?
Okay. First of all, you know, I signed as a third baseman. Never played third in rookie ball, played shortstop and did well and went, got to AA playing shortstop. Then in the next spring training, Cal's working me out at shortstop, and the other number one draft pick was Junior Kennedy. And he was between Bobby Grich, Junior Kennedy, Doug DeCinces. I was the third guy down. Well, when Bobby got sent out of the big leagues, back down, which was a shocker because the year before he was, you know, minor league rookie of the or player of the year and all those things. That meant Junior Kennedy was coming to AA. And I'm thinking, oh, geez, I'm going to go to A-ball someplace. And Cal Sr. came over. It was in breakfast. And he looks for me and he sees me and he goes, you know, he's got that funny hand where he'll bring the finger. And he waves it up and he's waving it at me going, come here. And so I come over there and he says, you ever played second base? And I looked at him and I went 2 and 2 equals I could go to AA playing second base. So my answer was, yeah. And he looked at me and he goes, just what I thought. Okay, hurry up and eat. You're going with me. So every morning for the rest of that spring training, he would pick me up. I'd get to there, eat breakfast early, and he would drive me to the camp. And I mean, Cal's always first. You know, he's there, and so I was there with him. And every morning, you know, he taught me turning double plays. You know, all angles, the thought process, and everything. So I was really a second baseman. So now I go. I leave AA. I'm going to AAA, and I come out of spring training, my very first spring training, and Jim Fry and Billy Hunter pulled me aside and they said, Doug, we're going to send you down and we want you to go down there and play third base. And I went, no, that's Brooks's play. And he goes, we're well aware of that, Doug, but there's been conversation and everybody feels like you've got the mental toughness to go do this. And I said, well, wait a minute. I still was like hesitant. I said, man, it's not a secret that when you're the heir apparent to something, you're going to be there for a short while before somebody else comes in. You know, you take the load and you're not successful.
Right.
And I had a good year in AAA, and I came back to the big leagues. And when I got to the big leagues, I played third, short, and second, and first, which I never had played before either. But I borrowed Boog Powell's glove one game, and the next thing I know, I'm playing first base. But it's having that ability to know. One of the things Cal taught me too is you got to know where everybody is on the field. Everybody, your outfielders, what the plays are, where you're supposed to be, and and I became a student of that, and so I could go over to first base and not be out of position and not know what to do. Go to second, go to short, whatever. If I had to go to the outfield, I'd do that. But so through that time, obviously Brooks was, I was honored to be around him, honored for this thing. But we took ground balls. He was great. He was great. Matter of fact, even the next spring training, we both lived up in Fort Lauderdale, and he and I would drive to the ballpark every morning. Just he and I. And I can remember opening the paper one day, and I'm reading a columnist, and the columnist is writing about the fierce competition between this young player, Doug DeCinces, and the Hall of Fame to be Brooks Robinson. And, they're really grinding, and, you can see the tension between them. And I said, Brooks, are you upset at me? He's driving. And he looked at me funny. He goes, what are you talking about? And I said, well, let me read you this article, and that's when all that stuff started.
Oh, okay.
All of the press, and it was not so much the everyday press guys, it was always the columnists. They thought they pick up that interesting story and they want to twang it so it says something that maybe or may not be true. And clearly that was the first one of, there's this competition between. The competition is I was trying to play in the big leagues. And, and Brooks at that point, the competition was he wanted to stay and keep playing. But there was never any of that between us. It was just, well, my turn to play. I'm going to show what I could do. But the great thing I had was being able to watch him. And I watched his footwork, and his footwork was different than a lot of third basemen. And I copied it and I worked on it. And you know what? It served me well. And to this day, I will tell you, people will ask me, what's the single most thing that you're proud of in your major league career? They're looking for a home run or this, a moment or something. I said, no, my single most thing proud of is that I ended up replacing Brooks Robinson and went on to have my own career. Because a lot of guys don't get that, Jeff.
Well, it's interesting that you say that it was a columnist that did it, because I'm reading it today. And that's why I asked you the question. And yet that legacy narrative is still out there. And then I saw, it may have been in his memorial that you gave a speech about the footwork. I was going to ask you about that. What was so different about his footwork where other third basemen didn't have it? Because I'm going to go look at some videos now.
Okay. Well, it's about taking that step and landing with your left foot a little forward of your right foot.
Right.
And you land on it just as the ball's in the hitting zone.
Okay.
Some guys you see now will jump into position.
Right.
I know that works for them. I know like a Mike Bordick, Oriole, great shortstop. He was a jumper. Okay. Jumping into position never gave me the feeling that I was in control.
Okay.
And and the other thing I watched with Brooks wasn't this guy. You remember Clete Boyer. I saw him, and then I saw Clete Boyer was feet spread, very low, glove on the ground guy before the ball's hit. And Brooks was never that. Brooks was up in that athletic position. And when he'd land, he'd always land with that front foot a little bit forward, and his crossover step and his ability to plant that foot and cross over back to the line. And I felt when I got that and I worked on it as much as I did, and it just made me that much better. And I felt that was one of the reasons that, there were 3 or 4 years where I led in assists and for third basemen. And I think it was because of the footwork. And I teach it to kids today, and it makes them better. So look at that and you'll see. But it's about balance. It's about landing, and watching the pitch. There's a peripheral vision aspect of the footwork and what you're seeing and knowing each pitch.
Okay.
Belanger would let me know the breaking ball, because if I'm seeing a hitter, let's say like a Jim Rice isn't going to pull a fastball down the line. He's more of a gap power guy. So if the fastball's coming at, I'm leaning to my left.
Okay.
Because I can see his approach
going
to the plate. But if it's a breaking ball and he's off speed and he's out in front, his wrists were pretty strong, and that meant that he could pull the ball. So I had to adjust to the pitch and the location of the pitch and watch his stride into the ball that allowed me to get that edge going right or left.
How receptive are the people the kids that you're coaching now? Are they receptive to this, or are they just sort of all right?
Well, I'll bring a name that I worked with at the time, who was in the big leagues at the time, and he came and asked me. He goes, Doug, my dad wants me to talk to you about your footwork, and so I worked with him. He's already in the big leagues, and he got in touch with me. I worked with him, and he went to spring training, and he says, I can't believe how much better it is. That player is Aaron Boone.
Oh, wow.
Okay.
Wow. Okay.
So Aaron, if that's a response, and he called me up and he goes, oh my gosh, I can't believe how much easier it is for me now. Because I saw Aaron when he was playing it for the Trojans out here, and he was a third baseman. Aaron's a great athlete. But his grandfather had a little different approach on how to do it. And there was a little, I talked to Ray about it. He goes, nah, he's fine. Don't you talk to him. So I never talked to him, but then Bob obviously goes, go talk to Doug.
That's funny. Anyway, that's great.
So that's great. A little inside story. But kids today, if they've had success, they really don't like to change. Until
even they got to consider the messenger here, right? Obviously, you had some success, a little bit of success, right? I mean, they don't give you that ounce of credibility.
You know what? I'm at the age now that kids go, oh, yeah, you played in the big leagues, but the game's changed. It's like the way you used to hit isn't the way we hit now. And I'm kind of going, well, we didn't never strike out 200 times in a season.
Because you guys knew how to be situational hitters, right? They're all long ball or nothing, and there's your strikeouts. Right?
Yeah.
There you go.
I watch these guys today with that drop back and whale swing, and I go, guys like Garrett Cole, sees that guy come up there, and Garrett Cole's going to work fastball down and in, slider way up, fastball, strike three. It's just the way they approach. Not everybody's 6'9", 275 like Aaron Judge. They can hit that way.
There you go.
Not everybody is that big and strong.
There you go. So in 1976, I want to ask you about a certain player. Most people forget that in 1976, the Orioles signed, I guess he was a free agent at the time, and it bridged his career from the A's to the Yankees, and that's Reggie Jackson. He played 1 year with the Orioles, but everybody forgets that little trap year to him, right? What was he like as a teammate? Because we know what he did when he went to the Yankees with, I'm the straw that stirs the drink in that whole, that locker room. What was he like in the locker room, and what was he like? Because you were teammates with him later on as well.
Yeah, I played 6 years with Reggie.
Right.
5 with the Angels and 1 with the Orioles. My first impression of Reggie wasn't really good. I'll be honest, because I'm a rookie, or not a rookie, but I'm, on the bench being a utility player, and hadn't quite taken, I'm playing more, but I hadn't quite taken all of third base, not until 77. And so I still wouldn't be playing every day. And he walks in after being 3 weeks late, I guess, or whatever, and he's taking batting practice. And the first game he comes in, and I'm sitting on the bench down the back end on the bench, and he hadn't introduced himself or anything to me, and he just looked at me and he goes, "Who the hell are you? And what do you do here?" And I kind of went. I looked at him and I go, "Well, right now, pretty much this."
That's funny.
And then the appreciation came. Reggie's appreciation came when he was with the Yankees, I think, and he came to third base. We get through there, and I was, a more established player, so he ended up talking, and then obviously we were teammates for a long time with the Angels, and
yeah. All right, I have to bring up a subject that pains me. I'm sure it pains you more. It's 1979. You know where I'm going with this. So I have a cousin that lived in Pittsburgh, and I called him at 3-1.
Yeah.
And I don't like to, I never talk trash, but I talk trash to him. And the next thing I know, he's calling me at 4-3. When you look back on that series, what are your thoughts now? And did you feel the pressure at 3-2, 3-3, and then the final game?
Well, I mean, there's pressure. It's not over till it's over. There's pressure. There's pressure. There's pressure. We were feeling pretty confident, obviously, going up. We were up 3-1. First of all, people forget about that series. That was the coldest World Series ever. People don't, the first night was rained out, and I woke up that next morning and I said, "Oh, I didn't hear any rain." I opened up the drapes of our house, and there was 14 inches of snow on my front lawn. And I went, "Wow. Oh my gosh."
I didn't know that.
Yeah. And so they went and pushed the snow off the field, and that's how and then the temperature was below, I think the temperature was 29, 30 at game time start. And so the water was not slushy. It was ice and icy, and it was cold. We got through, those first games, and then we go to Pittsburgh, and we got rained out for 2 hours, and then we started back up, and we ran back out onto the field. My steel spikes were breaking the ice on the artificial turf.
Wow.
I mean, it was miserably cold. But we got through there, and then that Sunday game, Jim Rooker threw against us. We hit him, but balls were going at people, and we couldn't really get. And Mike Flanagan wasn't on his game that day, and he was giving up hits and a few things like that. And things just kind of changed. But still, we were comfortable coming home. We've got Palmer and McGregor for 2 more games, and we felt, we felt like, hey, we got to go do it. And both those games were extremely tight. And just didn't get the last out we were looking for.
Well, I can't stand the.
And then I look back. I do have to look back now. Sometimes fate may come into it a little bit, because Willie Stargell was such a great player.
Right.
Okay. And really was the guy that stirred their drink.
Okay, there you go. There you go, Doug.
And look what he did to become the MVP of that series. I mean, his last 3 games were incredible.
Right.
When he hit that home run off of McGregor in the 8th inning to put him ahead 2-1, it was like, wow, I mean, this guy could do no wrong. And
they had a really stacked team when you go back and look at them.
It had a
they were a good team.
They had a great team, and I wouldn't say their starting staff was that great, but I mean, compared to our starting staff, no.
Right.
But they had that guy named Kent DeColey out there.
Yeah, number 27.
He was really good. He was really, really hard on me. I struggled hitting.
Was it his delivery or just he had a lot of movement on his ball?
Combination. His delivery, was coming off, and he had, his fastball was in the low 90s, and then dropping and throwing that swerve and everything, and his ball was moving. I mean, it was difficult.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So in 82, though, you get traded to the Angels. And, I was very upset as an Orioles fan and a fan of yours as well. Why did you get traded in 82?
You want to know the real answer?
I asked, yeah. So bring it,
All
Doug.
right,
Let me hear
I've
it.
given it to you. I give it to you. Well, in 1982, they had some young punk that wanted to play, third base. His name was Cal Ripken Jr. That was
You know what? Nepotism.
Okay. Anyway, who was he going to be? But no. But after the trade was made, and I knew there was a strong chance because the 81 season, I was the lead player rep for the American League. I was in every negotiating meeting in 1981.
Okay.
Edward Bennett Williams used to fly me down to Washington out of New York, meet him for dinner after the meetings, have a car take me to my house in Baltimore, and I'd have to get up early the next morning and take the train up for the meetings usually started around 11 o'clock in the morning.
Okay.
And, he didn't like some of the things that he was hearing because he found out that I was telling him the truth of what was going on. And he found out later that the ownership looked at him, the group ownership looked at him as a sawed-off shotgun a little bit. And they were telling him different things that were truly happening and that were always contradictory because I guess that they knew that he was talking. And so when the season was over and everything was settled, we had the last dinner we had together turned into a situation where he was all upset at me. And I just looked at him and I said, Mr. Williams, if you think that little of me, that I would come down here and sit and play a game and lie to you, when this is over, you're my owner. You're the owner of the team. I'm under your contract. I said, if you feel that little about me, why were you offering me to be a lawyer?
Right.
I mean, I said, well, the conversation was, and when I told him, I said, I'm telling you the truth and you're going to find out. You find out that I'm telling you the truth and all the things you've just said to me, it's going to be hard for you.
Right.
And I said, I think it's time for me to go. And I got up and the car took me home. And then I no longer got phone calls from him. He used to call me every day. And so I knew that things were going to be a little bit difficult. And when I got traded, Earl Weaver called me and he and I were on the phone for 2 hours. I never spoke 15 minutes at one time with Earl Weaver for 9.5 years. I mean, you just don't have those conversations with Earl when you're a player. So, but we had some confrontations, Earl and I, and, he felt, in all honesty, he said he had wanted me mad at him and not be focused on all the negativity of replacing Brooks Robinson. He used to ride me as a rookie like there was no tomorrow. And it just continued and continued. But he tried to explain to me why he did that.
Okay.
And I'm listening. And he goes, I want you to know. He said, I left that meeting and I said, you are not trading DeCinces. DeCinces my third baseman. Ripken's going to be my shortstop. And that's the end of it.
Right.
He left the meeting and Tom Giordano and a few other people, they talked to Edward Bennett Williams and Edward Bennett Williams says, trade DeCinces.
So in the context of that,
you got it. Well, you got to get to finish it. Earl told me right then and there, he says, it's the first time in my managing career that I've had an owner tell me who my lineup and who my players are going to be. He goes, Doug, the game's changing, and this is my last year. And I said, you serious about that, Earl? And he said, yes, this is my last year. And he retired right after the 82 season. And
Wow.
I kind of left knowing what happened.
Right.
And I loved my teammates with the Orioles. I loved the guys. We were very close. But my wish was, I hope they lose by one game and we win. That was my thing.
Well, it's interesting in the context of that explanation. It almost seems like 82 was a stick it to the Orioles year, because you go MVP third place and you were behind Yount and Murray.
Yeah.
We're a 30, 97, 301 season.
Yeah.
I mean, you sort of stuck it to them, didn't you?
Yes.
That was a great season.
It was. And maybe it was, everything kind of came together for me out there. And I felt like people were really appreciating what I could do at third. Sometimes, when I came back to Baltimore, I felt like the artist who died and became famous, his paintings became famous after he died. So I'm gone. I'm dead to the Orioles. And all of a sudden fans were cheering me when I came back.
That's pretty funny.
You know what I mean? It's kind of, I was the villain before. Now all of a sudden they realized, I think this is a true story too. The Orioles went through 10 third basemen and through, what year was that? 86 season, I think they had. And of course, I had a good year again in 86. And I called up Hank Peterson. I said, look, I'm going to be a free agent. I'd love to come back and finish my career with you guys. And Hank at that point said, Doug, I can't pay you the exact offer that the Angels were offering me. And I said, Hank, how do you know what they're offering me? Collusion started right then and there. I got off the phone, hung up, I called Ron Shapiro and I said, Ron, look what happened. He goes, Doug, stay on the phone. And we had called the Players Association. And next thing I know, I got a bunch of lawyers all on the phone. And I said, this is exactly what went down.
Right.
And now they started researching and doing a lot of things. And that's when they found out that, everybody was exchanging their offers.
Interesting.
I said, Hank, how does that make sense? I said, yeah, I don't know how many third basemen you have, but they combined for 42 errors and 36 RBIs. I said, how do you justify that, Hank? And Hank was quiet. He goes, Doug, I just can't justify it. That's just the way it is. And I went, okay.
Well, it was a good year. 26 homers, 96 RBIs. You finished 11th, in MVP voting. That's why I said it at the outset, I didn't introduce you as an Oriole because you had just as good, if not better, career in certain respects with the Angels. But you mentioned Earl, and you went to play for Gene Mauch. What was he like?
Gene, you know what? Earl was a lot harder to deal with, but I never questioned his faith that he had in you as a player. He knew what he had of his 25 guys, and he knew how to really operate. Gene was a quieter person, which is pretty easy to do compared to Earl during a game. But Gene had a superiority attitude, and he I don't really think he liked the 82 team at the start.
Okay.
I don't think at the start he had us bunting, Carew get on and Rich is bunting or Freddie Lynn's bunting or, I mean, guys were going, whoa, wait, what are we doing there? In the first inning, we're playing for one run? I don't think so.
Right.
Not with the lineup we had.
Right.
And we even had a meeting with him about it. So, this is a veteran team. I know you've always had a lot of younger guys and stuff, but this may not work here the whole season. And, and I'll give him credit. He did back off a lot on certain things, but anytime Boone or Foley was up and somebody was on, they were bunting no matter what. But I think Gene liked a game 1-0 more than he liked, going out there and having 3 Earl Weaver 3-run home runs in a game.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
I think he liked, don't get me wrong, Gene Mauch loved to win.
Right.
But he would sit back on the bench a little more. He wasn't into that standing there going, okay. But, I played for both of them, but it was different.
Okay. So you mentioned
Gene Mauch hated Players Association stuff. Hated.
Really?
Said, my first year there, he said, I just want you to know something. He goes, you're player rep for me. It means you're 1 foot out the door getting traded.
Wow.
And I looked at him and I said, yeah, I know your rep. I know that's your reputation. I said, but you got a problem here. I said, Reggie Jackson's player rep. Don Baylor's a player rep. Bruce Keeson's a player rep. I went through all the 7 player reps that all got traded here. Bob Boone was my counterpart. He was the National League player rep. I said, so you got to have a problem here, Gene. I think you maybe have to change. That's what I told him. And he looked at me and he goes, yeah, I might have to. I mean, he was angry. It was almost angry at me. And Earl Weaver told me before I went there, Earl told me, he goes, be careful. He hates Player Association guys. And Earl, I got to give Earl the credit. He thanked me for the efforts that I put in. He really did. He came up, shook my hand. He goes, I know that's difficult. I want you to know I appreciate everything you did.
That's great. You mentioned one of my all-time favorite players, and he was a teammate of yours in California. That's Rod Carew. How was he as a teammate? I mean, was he approachable from a hitting advice? Was he just seemed like, I don't know, he was a smooth player to me. Like, this guy got up with a weird stance and just slapped it around the park. The one thing people don't forget about him is how many bases he stole of home. Like 19, 20 steals, maybe more in his career. What was he like as a teammate?
Rod was great. We're still very close friends today.
Okay.
Very close friends today. And as a teammate, he was great. Rod Carew was Rod Carew. I mean, there were times I'd go up to hit behind him sometimes. He's at second, and I'm hitting third. And I remember walking up and Lance Parrish was catching. And I said, Lance, you know what's tough about following Carew? I said, the guy gets 2 and 3 hits every single day. He goes, and I know it's just not that easy. And he's laughing. He says, I can't get him out. I call every pitch in the world. I can't get the guy out. So we're having the conversation at home plate about how he's like was magical at times. I think at that point he was hitting over 400 when I ran into Lance and we were laughing at it. I said, I don't care what you throw him, he's going to hit it.
That's great.
But here's the thing. That team was unique because, Rod's kind of a quiet guy, really good guy, but kind of quiet. And he's not one to go out and be loud and brash and whatever. So now you got the other side of the clubhouse where Reggie's being loud and being Reggie. And sometimes there was a little bit of a conflict between those two, because Reggie wanted to be the big dominant, and sometimes Rod would stick up and say, hey, you don't treat people like that. Don't you dare,
He was the guy to do it, right? He had the political capital in that locker room.
No, the leader of the pack was always Don Baylor.
Really?
Oh, Reggie get out of hand. Don would take it right to the hill.
Wow, that's interesting.
No, that's one of the reasons why if you go look at it, you look at how many times Don Baylor got traded to a team and that team went to the World Series or went to the playoffs.
I'm
You
gonna
look at all the teams he played with.
I will.
He was the guy, not
Okay.
Reggie.
So, Doug, you mentioned how these kids there are saying the game's changed, and it has from a rules perspective. I want to ask you about some of the rules and maybe just get your quick opinions on them, see what you think. Do you like the pitch clock?
I like it because I think it keeps the game going. And as an ex-infielder, it's tough. But you have to wait 90 seconds between a pitch. I'll bring up the story. I don't like the racing of it sometimes, but I like the idea of speeding up the game where pitchers have to get on the mound and do a pitch. There was a time with my gosh, Steve Stone, and the year he won 25 games for us, he had lost, I think, his first 3 starts, and he had gone to some visualization process where somebody told him, go behind the mound, see each pitch, memorize it, get on the mound, and throw that pitch that you want to pitch. Okay, well, we were out at the start of the season. We're in the 5th inning, and Earl finally calls and takes Stone out of the game. It's 2 hours and 20 minutes into the game for the 5th inning. I finally told Earl, I said, Earl, this has got to change. I said, we're out here. We're dying out here. I mean, it's come to a snail's pace, and all of a sudden, he hangs a breaking ball. Somebody's hitting a rocket by us. I said, how can we play like this? Earl looks at me and he goes, do you think it's easy for me over there? And I said, well, make a change. I said, well, make him speed up, would you? And you know what? They made him speed up. He won 25 games that year.
There you go.
And so I recognize the benefit for both sides. It's really, the defense is much more alert. And the pitcher, I think, stays focused more. It's, it may physically be a little difficult, but I think it moves the game better. So I'm for that. So what's the next one?
The next one, I liked it at first, but now it feels a little softballish, and I understand why they probably need to do it to save arms, but the ghost runner.
Yes.
Okay. No comment. I'll move to the next one then. How do you feel about robo-umps? And let me preface this by saying, and I hope I don't offend you, I'm completely for it. Okay. I watched Jackson Holiday last year get nicked left and right on outside pitches, and I know the box, I've talked to umpires, don't necessarily represent the strike zone, but when you're seeing a ball
in their eyes, I'm sure.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's a good point. Touche. Right? But I'm seeing him nicked, and I'm seeing it this year, and everyone's like, well, I want to keep the human element in, and they're saying that on game 1, right? But tell me that in game 7 of the World Series when you get, the guy pulls the rip on an obvious ball, right? And so for me, I'm into it, but in a controlled way, not every pitch. Maybe you get 2 or 3 a game in the 7th to 9th innings, something like that.
Okay.
Here's a big disagreement coming. I could feel it.
No, I think it's a touchy subject as players or whatever. I think they're trying to get around that a little bit now, where I guess you can you tap your hat and
right.
you review it. I feel like I think something's got to start to change, and I have to tell you, I watched that first game of the World Series this year, and that was one of the worst home plate calls I've seen on TV in a long time. And I went, why is this guy doing the first game of the World Series? I mean, it was embarrassing for me. I was going, what? Nobody can. Pitchers didn't even know. One time it was a strike. Next time it's a ball. Oh, and the hitter's up there trying to find it, and now it's not a strike. Then it is. I think everybody adjusts to the umpire if they're consistent.
Okay.
If the game, you go through it and they have a consistency, and if they're going to be calling the low pitch, then as a hitter, I got to know it. And the pitcher certainly knows it. Okay. But it's harder for the hitter to adjust than it is for the pitcher to adjust.
Right. Okay.
But then when all of a sudden the pitcher's getting that low pitch and he throws, a belt high fastball a little bit up, but not out of the zone, and it's a ball in a key situation, great pitchers use the whole zone. And so I think that there's benefit to both.
Okay.
I think maybe having that ability, but I find the thing that I find worse is that the players no longer can even turn around and say anything to the umpire without getting thrown out of the game. I find that competitively disappointing.
Okay.
Because you're in the heat of a game like that and everything. Players should have the ability to question the call. And today's umpires you don't look at me, and they want to throw you out of the game just for looking at you.
Well, Laureano got tossed, I think it was yesterday, because he didn't like the strike call, and he flung the bat, and he was yelling, and you're out. But it was pretty demonstrative. So, but he was walking away. He didn't turn and say it to the umpire.
He even looked at it. Yeah, but the thing is if you look at it and say something, you don't even have to say anything bad. But if you look at him and you say that ball's not a strike, he can throw you out today. I
think it was last season.
I find that unbelievable.
I think it was last season where you mentioned him. Aaron Boone got tossed from the dugout when the fan said something. Did you see that one?
Exactly. I saw that. And I was like, what? I mean, can you imagine? I mean, you can hear Earl Weaver's voice. I mean, it got to the point where Earl and the umpires, I mean, I'll tell you, there's a game I played in Chicago. It was a day game. It was in the middle of summer and it was hot. And Ron Luciano's behind the plate. And I'm up there and Earl's kind of chirping on him, and all of a sudden, a 3-2 pitch almost bounced. And that pitch almost bounced. And Ron Luciano said to me, or he goes, strike 3. And I'm taking a step and a half back. I'm kind of turned around. I was already on my way to first base. And I looked at him, and Earl steps up on the first step, and he turned. Strike 3, and he turned and looked at Earl, and he goes, you're out of the game. I came up to home plate the next inning. He threw Earl after a large argument. Okay. He goes, I come up to home plate. I said, what was that all about? He goes, I'm sorry, Doug. He goes, I owe you. He says, it's too hot, and I'm not listening to that guy anymore for the rest of the game. I said, Carlton Fisk is laughing. I go, holy crap. I'm just going, and Luciano, that was just Ron Luciano. That's just the way he did it.
Have you ever seen the video I watch it every now and then for a great laugh, where it looked like a night game in Memorial where Earl gets into it with the ump, and it's mic'd up and you can hear everything, and it just goes on, and then he walks away, he comes back, and Earl's like, well, I'm going to be in the Hall of Fame, and he goes, what, forever? World Series. It's actually and the guy, I don't know what he's eating. He's pulling stuff out of his back pocket.
It was Bill Haller. I remember the game. I was playing in the game.
Okay. That was hysterical.
Yeah.
Great. Okay. I got to ask you about a situation. And this drives, because look, you're a former player. You've been in this situation on both sides of the field. And it just drives me. I know what you're going to say. Let's see if you say it. Less than 2 outs, man on third, infield in, go on contact. The last 2-3 years I've seen the Orioles do that. They get gunned down at home every time. Why are you not seeing the ball, especially if there's no outs, through the infield and then run?
Well, how many outs are you talking about?
Less than 2. Could be
Less
1,
than-
could be 0.
Okay. Bob, it doesn't make any difference with 2. No outs, you should not be going.
Okay.
1 out, and you're in a tough hitting behind you. It all depends what the lineup is and whatever. Okay. You're hoping, if it's a high. We used to. I mean, Cal Ripken used to say, "Read the hop. If it's a hard skip ball, don't go. But if it's a high chopper, go." So you got to read the ball off the bat to make that decision.
The last 2-3 years I've watched every game the last 2-3 years, and it's they get thrown out at home. There's never a mistake. I keep saying to my buddy who's played a lot of baseball says, "Well, it's got to be a perfect play." Well, to your point, it's a perfect bounce, clean bounce, right to the catcher, tag, you're out. And it just drives me nuts. So it's interesting. I'm gonna watch the hops from now on.
Well, it's all about reading the ball off the bat. Now, okay, it's like, where is it? Is it right at the second baseman or shortstop, or is it up by the pitcher's mound? See, it's a whole read situation.
Well, they're not reading it, Doug. They're not reading it. They're just going.
Well, they're reading it on the ground, otherwise they wouldn't go. I mean, because if it's a line drive, you've got to be going back to third base with less than 2 outs.
Right. Okay.
You got to be going back. You don't go on contact on the ball in the air. Well, there's a lot of things in today's game that I have to say that is very disappointing. I guess they don't take infield very much, but I have never seen so many throws from the outfield not even be within the batter's box at home plate.
Yeah.
I mean, balls are so far offline, and I'm going, how's this guy a Major League Baseball player? And you can't throw a ball from the outfield within a 10, 15-foot radius? I mean, sometimes you see guys, missing it by 20, 25 feet. Am I wrong? Have you seen that?
Yeah, absolutely.
And to me, it's, we don't want to take infield because their arms will get stressed, or when else does an outfielder throw? When else does an infielder get there and catch and throw home? Only in infield. We took infield every day, and it's practice right. Perfect practice makes perfect execution. And if you practice it right, then hit. But if you're not practicing it, can't just go out there and make it happen every day.
Well, different era, right? And that's why I always like to go back to YouTube and watch Dave Parker in the outfield, right? He didn't need a cutoff. He just got it right to the glove and done from the outfield.
There's a lot of guys like that. I remember the first time I saw Vladimir Guerrero throw from right field. I was like, holy crud,
Yeah.
I mean, guys have great arms. You got to use them.
Absolutely.
You know who had a great arm? Reggie Jackson had a great arm. You know what his problem was? He wound up to throw it. He could never, like Dave Parker could catch and release.
Right.
Reggie was never a catch and release guy. He was, catch it, take a couple steps, wind up, and then throw the arm. And he had a great arm. It just, by the time he released it, it was sometimes too late.
That's interesting. But let's close it out with a speed round. I'll give you a few players' names that we haven't talked about yet, and then just give me your thoughts on them. Actually, let me ask you one other question I wanted to ask you. I forgot. Who was the toughest starting pitcher you faced, and who was the toughest reliever?
Okay, I tell you, the toughest reliever was Dan Quisenberry for me.
Okay.
Just played pepper with Aldi and Frank White, George Brett, Freddie Potok. I think I was 0 for 18 before I finally got a hit. I got a little ground ball in the last turf, got to right field. I got to first base and went, yay! And he knew it. He was laughing. And I said, finally, I got a hit. I mean, I was 0 for 18 off the guy. You know how many years that is? He's a closer. I'm just not like it. As a starter, wow. Nobody really jumps out to say, I think I had a hard time with Dave Leonard with Kansas City. You know,
Okay.
he could hit, but there were guys that I thought, were great pitchers that, eventually would make a mistake and I could still hit them. But there were certain guys, a guy that was frustrating was Catfish Hunter. Very frustrating. He just always had the ball a little out of the zone. He kept getting in the meat of the bat, but the ball was flying out to right center, left center. And you come back after that game and you go, how did I get 0 for 4? But he was a great pitcher. Today's guys just slow up and throw.
What was it like facing Nolan?
It was a challenge. I think there's only 2 pitchers that struck, intimidation to me, and Nolan and Goose Gossage were the 2 guys. Okay. And it didn't mean that I wasn't in there, but my first at bat against Nolan Ryan, Earl gave me the bunt sign. I was a rookie. And I squared around and bunted, and I fouled that 100-mile riser, fouled it straight back. Andy Etchebarren, who was with us and got traded, and this is the first game we're playing against Andy afterwards, and I'm a rookie, and Andy comes around first the plate, and he goes, Dougie, he goes, blankety blank Earl Weaver. He knows Nolan doesn't like anybody that bunts. He goes, I don't know where this pitch is going, so heads up. So I got the bunt sign. I turned around and square. That ball was right at my forehead, and I went down, and he looked at me. I didn't like it. I was looking back because, you're trying to ruin my career.
Right.
I looked down there, and I got the bunt sign again, and I went, all right, okay. So I square around, and Nolan throws that curveball like behind me. And I go down, and it snaps right over the plate for a strike. It was embarrassing. And I think Nolan wanted to embarrass a hitter more than he cared about anything else. It was about and he was, as I said, in Gossage, I hit the home runs off of him and he hit me, So
they don't do that anymore, do they? They don't hit you the next time up.
No.
Different game. How about Tommy John?
Tommy, I didn't have a problem facing him. I never tried to pull him. And, and he knew that. And he said he'd give a base hit to right field up versus, that was his view. I played with him and against him. And, I think he liked my defense at third because he relies on guys catching ground balls, and Tommy just never changed. He was he just could move the ball, change speeds, moving the ball, cut it in. He just never would throw a ball over the plate.
All right, let me throw out a couple more names before we conclude here. And here's a name of an Oriole teammate that I didn't like initially. So it just shows you how much of a judge I am, right? Because he replaced one of my favorite players when I first started following the Orioles, and that was Lee May.
Oh, I thought it was
it's Eddie Murray. Eddie Murray.
Eddie's one of my dear friends as well. And Eddie Murray is I was shocked that he didn't get 100% in the Hall of Fame in the first vote. I thought it was disrespectful. And, whoever those guys that didn't vote for him should never have the ability to vote again. Eddie Murray was by far, all the players will tell you, was probably the best clutch hitter ever. 19 grand slams.
I didn't know that. I didn't realize that. 19.
Okay. Wow. I got to tell this story. I'm now with the Angels, and Cal Ripken's having his, a great year in front of him. And there's second and third, 2 outs. And our pitching coach comes out and talks to our pitcher. He goes, look, first base is open. Gene Mauch doesn't want you, he said, don't give him anything to hit. And I'm looking at him and I said, you're saying, if he walks him? And he goes, yeah, he doesn't want, And I looked at them and I said, that's Eddie Murray on deck. And I'm on the Angels now. I thought, that's Eddie Murray on deck. You can't do that. And sure enough, they walked him. 2 pitches later, after Eddie's up, he hits the ball 450 at the back of the wall at Anaheim Stadium for a grand slam. He's coming around. And he's coming around, and I'm right there. And I said, I told him not to walk Cal to get to you. And he just looked at, he's shaking his head. He's just like that, shaking his head. Because he was the best clutch hitter. I mean, you didn't give him a pitch, he's still going to hit the ball to drive in another run. He was just incredible. Incredible. That's why he's in the Hall of Fame. He's one of the best ever.
Yeah. A couple more players. Jim Palmer.
Just saw him the other night at the Angel Oriole game out here. Jim was a perfectionist. How I really knew how good he was, he threw batting practice in spring training when I was young. And he said, the catcher, he said, put the glove in the center of the plate. And he went out there and went pitch after pitch after pitch right in the center of the plate.
Wow.
And I asked him later, I said, Jim, why don't you, because all the other pitchers, when they throw batting, they're trying to work the corners and do all that stuff and trying to get you out at batting practice when they throw. And he goes, look, my theory is I'm throwing to that glove. I want it I'm just looking focused on it. He goes, I know where that glove is. I'm going to hit it. And he was just gifted, and his mental thought of the game, he knew about everything. It was great.
What strikes me about him, when I love listening to him, and the Orioles broadcast team is one of the best. And I've exchanged notes with him, replying back and forth sometimes on Twitter. His recollection of facts is incredible. He knows it down to on the third pitch, I hit a grand slam, whatever because he hit a homer in one game, and that's what we were going back and forth on. But it was down to the detail. I was like, how is he remembering it? It's 50 years ago.
No, I can tell you things.
No, your recollection's great as well. I can't remember what I had for dinner, so
Well, when you're in that kind of competition and you're focused, and as I said, Jim's a perfectionist. Jim, God-given ability. He's a great athlete, and he can spot that high fastball and make guys swing at it all day long, and then drop that curveball where he wanted to. Sometimes he would try to control too much, about that, but his memory is because he's so focused.
Right. Okay. Two more for you. This is from my buddy John, and he'll laugh when he watches this. Paul Blair. Gifted
athlete.
Okay.
I signed and went to Anaheim Stadium as an Oriole, and they were playing the Angels when he got hit in the face. And I never forgot that. And then I got to come and play with him and watch him, how the ball was hit. And you just see his numbers, and he'd look up and catch it. He made a play over the fence one time, and I said, to me, the only other guy that I played with, which I thought was probably one of the best natural gifted athletes, was Fred Lynn. Fred Lynn was that same guy that could play where he wanted to, but if the ball's hit, he got a perfect read. And that's the one thing that Paul just was. He set the bar, and then when I saw Freddie Lynn do the same thing, that was pretty impressive.
He was my last guy I was going to ask you about. So,
really?
He just wrapped up the episode. I mean, I got a whole list here for you, but he was on my list.
I like that. I don't mind.
Fred Lynn was the last one. So, Doug, this has been so enjoyable for me. We talked before you got on. I gave you my wounds as an Orioles fan. So, but thank you so much for joining. It was great. I enjoyed it. I can't wait to get this out to everybody. Thank you.
Well, my pleasure. I tell the Oriole fans to hang in there, but I also watch from the West Coast, and I think they should be better than they are right now. But injuries are injuries, and you lose your guys. It's tough to win.
Agree.
Major League Baseball is not an easy game.
No, not at all. Thank you so much.
You take care. Bye.
Take care, everybody.